Welcome to The Deepest Cut, a podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. A recorded song draws a clear line in the sand. Think about it. Each time an artist goes into the studio to record a song, they're not just telling a story or making an observation or stating a perspective. It also marks a very specific point in time in the narrative. They're giving a particular snapshot from their worldview. So even as the artist might change, the song remains in that same place forever. It's funny to think about the notion, then, that some artists will sing the same songs over and over again for years, because that's what fans want to hear. Even as the version of the artist who wrote them might be so far removed from that original moment when they wrote and recorded the track. This is the reason that singer-songwriter Jon Guerra labored for the better part of a decade on the song that he chose to discuss with us on The Deepest Cut. Teach Us That One Song, from his album Keeper of Days, chronicles Jon's spiritual journey, from his childlike faith through the more complex terrain of adulthood, as suffering and doubt and disorientation entered the picture. Teach Us a New Song frames Jon's vulnerable and earnest attempts to hold on to the things that matter most, even as his own faith has ebbed and flowed over the last few decades. It's a beautiful reflection anchored in his childhood that's taken on even greater meaning after becoming a father himself. If you're familiar with Jon's music, you'll know that such substantive work is par for the course, and I'm a big fan of his most recent EP, American Gospel. But if you're new to his music, you've got a wonderful journey ahead of you as you dive into his catalog. And by the way, film buffs should know that Jon and his wife Valerie are composers for director Terrence Malick, including the stunning 2019 release, A Hidden Life. We hope you listen in and enjoy as Jon Guerra details the backstory behind his track, Teach Us That One Song, here on The Deepest Cut. Hello and welcome to The Resistance. My name is Matt Connor. Today I have the honor of sitting down with Jon Guerra, who not only, by the way, you're not just like your own songwriter with your own music, you also do film scoring. Are there other, by the way, creative outlets that people should know beyond that?
I make a really good magnetile castle with my 4-year-old. And we also took some, sodium phosphate and other chemicals and made a unicorn village. So
Essential skills.
Feels like all the creativity at this point is either very pointed towards poetry, songwriting, and just really what I feel like my vocation is kind of like a religious experience, religious feeling. If it's not that, then it's just with my daughter and my, her growing mind and her just trying to hold on to her creativity and latch onto it and glean something and guide it.
This podcast is largely about, we ask artists or bands to pick the song that's been the most maybe painful or difficult for them to process, work out right, and then release. Before we get into your song specifically or your choice, I just wondered what it was like to choose that. Was it a very obvious decision for you? Was there some sifting and sorting to do? What was that process like?
Yeah. I think there was some sifting, sorting to do. There's a couple different topics. I think I am somewhat of a confessional songwriting, so I try to use my own life experience as a jumping off point. And so there's several songs where I've been more or less vulnerable about my own experience of the world. So, I could have done the song. There's a song that I wrote called Citizens, which was hard for a bunch of reasons, and also cathartic for a bunch of reasons. There's a song on my forthcoming album about kind of money and treasure, and I talk about growing up as an immigrant kid, and that felt vulnerable because I talk about that from the stage, and I kind of often mention that, but I don't often talk about it in song. Talk about the difficulty of not really knowing what culture you're from and trying to fit in. And but the one that I chose, I think it's the reason I chose it's called "Teach Us That One Song" is because it almost feels like it's a song that talks about the integration of the different stages of our spiritual life. And to me, that's something that is ongoing. You never get to a place where you've graduated from having to make sense of your own past or make sense of your own faith in different stages of your life. So that's the one that and that one also took me a long time. It took me about 7, 8 years. It took me 8 years to finish. And in a lot of ways, I really could have continued writing it because it's not something that I've graduated from. But it was a little hard. Yeah.
I find that portal into it interesting because you said, I could have written about this, I could have written about that. Both are vulnerable, whatever. But the one you chose to write about or identify as here's the most difficult or painful or whatever is about the faith journey, which maybe people normally wouldn't equate like faith journey with painful or whatever. Would you say it's more about faith journey and documenting that being difficult, or really is it getting into the painful process of maybe learning and then the unlearning? Like, can you take us into that?
Yeah. Well, the thing that's really been the center of my life and my heart has been trying to make sense of the God experience in my life. I mean, it's been the center of my songwriting for a long time, but really just of my attention and my focus since I was 12 years old. And I think that it's the places in our lives that are most precious to us that I think make us most vulnerable to pain. So that's why when you have um, maybe when you fall in love for the first time or something, it makes you most vulnerable to the heartbreak. You've maybe been hearing songs about it, or maybe you've seen movies or read books, but then when you actually fall in love and that person maybe removes the love or they break up or something, it's like that's such a hinge point for people as young, as a teenager, whenever that happens, anytime in your life, when there's unrequited love, it's painful. Or when you have a kid, or when you really set your heart on something. When you set your heart on something, it opens you up to pain in a way that wouldn't be there otherwise. And I think that for a variety of reasons, I had kind of set my heart on God, I guess, in a very vulnerable way as a young kid, and have been really this. Even the song that I chose is kind of it's a story of trying to make sense of even the disappointments there. And the disappointments manifest themselves in a variety of ways, like the faith disappointment. Sometimes it's comes out as anger, sometimes it comes out as tears, sometimes it comes out as indifference, sometimes it comes out as deconstruction. And I've really tried to hold on to the core and hold on to that little delicate, maybe flame, that little pilot light of faith inside, and try to kind of meet God there at different stages of my life and different stages of my own faith. And it's been more or less painful. It's interesting, the word pain, isn't it? Like, it's like there's acute pain, there's physical pain, there's mental pain, there's dullness, but I think behind everything, I think, and I don't say this necessarily as to my credit or to my debt, but mainly just as an observation. But really, feel like I'm always having a conversation with God, even behind every thing that happens in my life, whether it's with my parents, with my spouse, with my daughter, with my career, with my age. I'm always there's sort of like this ongoing conversation that I'm having with God in all those things. So I think at the center of it all, it's sort of that initial vulnerability, that initial kind of giving myself over to the Christian Wyman, a poet, calls it a bright abyss. You throw yourself into the bright abyss, which is God and which is faith in Him, and you don't know what you're going to hit when you hit the ground, or if you're going to hit the ground. And sometimes you're floating for a while, but there's a brightness there that beckons you and calls you. And different times in your faith journey, you feel a confidence in that leap. And other times you feel like, what in the world have I done? So I chose this song because it kind of, it sort of gestures towards that longer conversation.
It reminds me of, I remember the first time I heard Sufjan Stevens, an album called Seven Swans, which I don't know if you're familiar there. And there's the title track just has this stanza where he just says, I saw a sign in the sky, seven swans, seven swans, seven swans. I heard a voice from inside saying, I will try, I will try, I will try. And it's, to me, this, I mean, I've always kind of held on to that because it's like this description for me of, yeah, what I think, what I believe has changed over time. You're handed a certain faith and then you wrestle with it yourself through the stages of life. But I cannot deny I saw something in some way that's very difficult to describe. I have felt that, I've experienced that, and I can't let go of that even in times of doubt or isolation or pain or whatever. And yet the only thing I can really offer is what he says, I will try, because that's really all that I have in the liminal spaces or in the certainty, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of this humble posture toward this awe or marvel or otherness, I guess. And I hear what you're saying and even what you're singing with that same posture.
Yeah, I think we're definitely we are creatures made for we're spiritual beings in bodies. And I heard one person, I think it was Dallas Willard, say we are creatures that exist at the intersection of the spiritual and the physical and the material. And I think the reason why we like music and art and why love can be so powerful and why suffering can be so tragic is because these are experiences that are more than material. These are experiences that echo into the spiritual, and the spiritual is invisible but as real as tables and chairs. It's a plane of being that we all know and experience and are rooted in, and so when something in that seems to kind of grip us, and when we kind of start making claims about what's happening in that realm and in that dimension, oh man, it can be tricky. It can be, people can use it for all sorts of ends. If I think a lot of people have experienced, or at least know what it's like to be manipulated, or at worst, spiritual abuse or church abuse. This is something that conversation that's feels like we were having more, I guess, a few years ago, but it still feels like it's happening now. Just people trying to make sense of maybe players that were not totally, didn't have all the integrity that they should have had when they were holding the kind of authority that they had over them or something. And that's very real and it's very damaging. And so what often happens is, you throw the baby Jesus out with the bath water of manipulation, and then you find yourself stranded, but there's something there that has to fill that, right? So there's all sorts of, whether it's politics, whether it's, health industry, whether it's kind of a piecemeal spirituality, or whether it's just kind of like a nihilism that kind of has you living on the surface of things. It's like we can almost, I think that is the hinge point. That's kind of the pivot point. It's like the pain that is in that space, in that kind of spiritual space, ricochets in all sorts of directions. And you can almost you could trace back to the center of a person's heart, from their addictions or their secrets, or all the way to some kind of pain that happened there, whether it's church or not. I mean, parents, goodness gracious, became a parent 5 years ago, and it's like, oh my gosh, I am like having direct contact with this person's eternal soul, and that's such a big responsibility. And yeah, it's a big task. So yeah, all that to say, I think this is, whether we even name it as whatever language you use for it, trauma is another word. We're trying to find language to talk about, to bear up against the reality of the vulnerability that is there and the wounds that are real, and it doesn't mean that they're not unable to be healed or unable to be integrated into a larger whole. But I think the aim, at least towards language in our recent culture, in our recent years of trying to come up with language to describe this stuff, I think is at least healthy.
Teach Us That One Song is the name of the song. It's a progression, like you said, through a faith journey. You start with, God, I was just a kid, 3 chords, I raised my hymn, and how I raised my heart with it. From there, it progresses through. Then you also reference it took you 8 years to even write the song. I mean, was that because you had this nascent idea to write about a faith journey, but maybe needed further journey of your own? Or can you take us into that?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you nailed it. Yeah, that was it. The initial idea was in 2010, and I think I needed to kind of go through couple different phases or stages, or needed to come to terms with certain parts of my own story or certain parts of my own self, even in order to finish it. The song starts there, and then it basically goes through. I think it in many there's sort of like an initial phase of like I'm all in, whether that happens as a kid or happens as an adult. You're sort of like this. You become aware and you have an experience, and you're like, this is very real, and this is everything to me. And then maybe you grow a little bit, and then you start to feel, oh, maybe God is. Was I totally full of crap back then? Like, where's that initial sensation? And you kind of get a little bit disoriented, and then maybe you get reoriented into something like, okay, no, there's a more settled version of this that is maybe it's better for the long haul. You think you've kind of hit this kind of plateau, and then maybe something happens in your life where you're like, whoa, I don't know how to. My ideas of God and my ideas of myself can no longer bear up under the reality that I'm living, whether that's the reality of in the world, whether that's some personal pain, or maybe you've done something, maybe you're like, holy cow, I didn't realize I was capable of that. And then it kind of falls into shambles again, and you have to sort of figure out what to do with all that. And in my case, time and time again, when my almost ideas of myself and ideas of God has come tumbling down, what I've found in the rubble is God. I mean, it's like God is somehow even below my ideas, and the scaffolding that was built in different seasons of my life. It's like there's an even more tender grace underneath all of that I continue to discover. So I now, almost late 30s, almost 40, you kind of start to count on that. Okay, so if this whole thing comes tumbling down, I actually can trust that there maybe is going to be a tender grace underneath it all, and then I'll try to rebuild it. But that journey takes a long time. It takes a lot of years. It takes a lot of failures. It takes a lot of disillusionment. It takes a lot of disappointment. The song ends with, Christ, my heart's beloved one, are you proud of who I've become? Your voice is the voice I want. So you sing that one song and I'll sing along. So the song is from the perspective of kind of like as soon as I started playing guitar, I was playing in church and I was leading worship, leading the singing. And so it's kind of from the perspective of a kid who has been doing that and now is like, I'm kind of tired of singing. I'm tired of hearing my own voice. I'm tired of trying to muster up some emotion to make myself and these people feel like they've had an experience of you when, maybe it's just music. Maybe we're just singing to the air or something. But then it's kind of, it ends with this, like, actually, you're the one that's underneath all this, God. And I want you to sort of help me come to terms with who I am and what this whole thing is. And then that vulnerable question, I think that's probably one of the more vulnerable lines I've ever written is, are you proud of who I've become? Are you proud of this version of me that I could have never foreseen, and that maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but are you proud of me? I don't think there's a more vulnerable thing to ask. And so that's kind of where it ends. And I think that's kind of where I still am. In many ways, I sort of I'm asking Christ that question. And in different seasons, I'm convinced of the answer. In other seasons, I find myself being like, I don't know what the answer is,
My assumption would be, now that you're a father with a young daughter, that when you sing or reference that question now, it probably even has a more loaded meaning or feeling or understanding to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
One more for you here, because, this could have easily been called Teach Me That One Song, right? You're documenting your faith journey. And at the end, you do say that. But the title of the song, all throughout the song, you're saying, teach us that one song. There's an assumption there on your part, maybe, that, hey, my journey, I'm assuming it's probably very common and we all need this. Can you even talk about the use of the pronoun there? How intentional was that for you, and what you're trying to say about community, about all of us?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. So it has, two reasons. Number one, I think often our faith journey starts very wide and maybe gets a little bit more narrow as we grow, and then there's kind of it sort of hits this point where I think it becomes broad again, and it's almost we need each other, and we need to have this perspective that we're not alone, on this path, and that um, God isn't um, God isn't kind of exclusively his work isn't exclusive to me or my little group or my little tribe. So we need both the broad vision, and then we also need this. Well, we need this almost the particularity of you as a person is very important. Jesus became a particular person, and I think his attention somehow is able to be particular to us as individuals. But what happens when people hit these points of crisis in their faith is they often start to feel that the world gets very small, and it starts to feel like I'm the only one who's ever felt this, or I'm the only one kind of going through this. And I just kind of wanted to keep that in there. Like, no, this is all of us. Like, we're all going through some kind of, there are stages to this. And if there isn't, then I think that's more of a problem than if there, if you are just kind of coasting through your life and your faith journey, that I think that's evidence of bad things, not evidence of good things. So having both of those in there, this both like, man, this is all of us. This isn't just me. But then ending it with teach me, like I'm only really responsible for my own response. I'm only capable of understanding truly my own response. One of the things I love, again, about that poet Chris Wyman, he says, sometimes faith takes the form of rejecting faith. Sometimes it's saying no to something that you're actually moving closer to God. It's the paradox of, is the prodigal son closer to his father in the pigsty, or is he closer to his father before the pigsty when he's living in the house before he'd gone through that journey? Well, in one sense, it's both and, right? Physically, he's closer to him, but in one sense, he needed to kind of leave, and he needed to hit rock bottom. And that was a necessary step towards that return to the Father. And C.S. Lewis has that, same analogy where he says, when you're climbing a mountain and you are trying to get to a town, when you're halfway up the mountain, and maybe you're kind of circling the mountain, you see the town with your eyes. You're like, it's right there. It's just only 500 yards away, but there's actually no direct path to it. You actually have to climb all the way around it to get all the way down. And I think there's an analogy there for our journeys too. There's a path that's necessary, and sometimes it's excruciating, and you wish you could just cut it in half, but you can't. Sometimes you have to go through the whole shebang.
John, I love that. This feels like a perfect time to really let people hear your own journey. And it's a beautiful song. I'd love to have you take us into it, if you would.
Yeah. So this song is called Teach Us That One Song. It took me about 7 years to finish. And it maps the journey of a young kid who comes alive to God, and the different stages of faith, and ends with kind of this surrender, an exhale, and then a looking up towards God. And that's it. Hope you enjoy it.
God, I was just a kid. 3 chords, I raised my hymn, and how I raised my heart with it. Teach us that one song that we all used to know. kid. Strum that old guitar. The Lord will strum your heart, for that's how all your best songs start. Teach us that one song that we all used to know. It went Gloria. Lord, I've been the boy David, sprinting to Goliath. But these days my feet ain't as quick. Teach us that one march that we all used to know. You went, kid, bring your sling and I'll bring an army. Christ, my heart's beloved one, are you proud of who I've become? Your voice is the voice I want, so teach me that one song. And I will sing along. I'll sing hallelujah. I'll sing gloria. I'll sing
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.